In the late 1960s, a small rural town in Pennsylvania was rocked by a series of strange and disturbing events. The focal point of these occurrences was the old Weaver Farm, a dilapidated property on the outskirts of town, long abandoned and rumored to be cursed. The Weaver family had vanished without a trace a decade earlier, leaving behind their home and all their possessions. Stories circulated about strange lights and noises coming from the house at night, but most townspeople dismissed these as superstitions, until a young couple, the Harrisons, moved into the farmhouse. The Harrisons, Sarah and John, were newlyweds looking for a quiet place to start their life together. Despite the warnings, they purchased the Weaver Farm, charmed by its rustic appeal and low price. From the moment they moved in, they experienced an unsettling feeling, as if they were being watched. The first week was uneventful, but then strange things started happening. Objects would move on their own. Doors would slam shut, and they would hear faint whispers in the dead of night. John tried to rationalize these events, but Sarah was becoming increasingly frightened. One night, as Sarah was brushing her teeth, she saw a shadowy figure in the bathroom mirror. She spun around, but no one was there. Shaken, she told John, who assured her it was just her imagination. However, he couldn't explain the cold spots that seemed to follow them around the house or the mysterious scratches appearing on their walls. The final straw came when they discovered an old, dusty diary hidden in the attic. It belonged to Martha Weaver, the last resident of the house. The diary detailed how her family had been tormented by a dark presence that grew stronger each day. Martha described how it started with small disturbances, much like what the Harrisons were experiencing. Eventually, her entries grew more frantic, detailing violent attacks and the feeling of being constantly watched. The last entry was the most disturbing. "It's taken them. All of them. I am alone now and it wants me too. I can feel it. It's here with me in the shadows. I don't know how much longer I can hold on." Terrified, the Harrisons decided to leave the house. As they were packing, the disturbances escalated. The whispers grew louder, turning into blood-curdling screams. The house seemed to come alive with malicious intent, objects hurling themselves across rooms, windows shattering, and lights flickering violently. In a panic, Sarah and John fled, leaving most of their belongings behind. As they reached the edge of the property, they heard a final, spine-chilling scream from the house. They never returned to the Weaver Farm, and the property fell back into abandonment, its dark reputation further solidified. The town has since left the Weaver Farm alone, its twisted history a cautionary tale of the unseen horrors that can lurk within even the most unassuming places. To this day, locals avoid the area, especially after dark, fearing that whatever haunted the Weavers and the Harrisons might still be there, waiting for its next victims. Years passed, and the legend of the Weaver Farm became an eerie piece of local folklore. Few dared to venture near it, and those who did never stayed long. The Harrisons, though they had escaped, never spoke of their time at the farm again, haunted by the memories of their brief, terrifying experience. In the early 2000s, the story of the Weaver Farm caught the attention of a group of paranormal investigators known as the Shadow Seekers. Led by seasoned investigator Jack Turner, the team was known for exploring and documenting haunted locations. Intrigued by the chilling history, they decided to investigate the farm despite warnings from the townspeople. Armed with cameras, recording devices, and an array of paranormal detection equipment, the Shadow Seekers arrived at the Weaver Farm on a cold October evening. The farmhouse loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, its windows like empty eyes staring at them. As they set up their equipment, the air grew noticeably colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped the area. The team split into groups to cover more ground. Jack and his colleague Lisa started in the attic, where the diary had been found. The attic was thick with dust and the air felt heavy. They began recording, asking questions in the hopes of capturing any spirit communication. Almost immediately, their equipment picked up faint, disembodied whispers. Meanwhile, downstairs, Tom and Sarah explored the kitchen and living room. Tom set up an EMF meter which began to spike erratically. "There's definitely something here," he whispered, his breath visible in the cold air. Suddenly, the old wooden door slammed shut, and Sarah screamed. They rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Back in the attic, Jack and Lisa heard the scream and rushed downstairs. The moment they stepped into the hall, the house seemed to come alive. Lights flickered, objects moved on their own, and the whispers turned into loud, unintelligible murmurs. Jack felt a cold hand grasp his shoulder, but when he turned around, no one was there. Lisa's camera captured a dark, shadowy figure darting past them. "Did you see that?" she exclaimed, her voice trembling. Jack nodded, feeling the oppressive presence growing stronger. They regrouped in the living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. "This is unlike anything we've ever encountered," Tom said, his voice shaking. "We need to get out of here." As they attempted to leave, the front door slammed shut with such force it cracked the doorframe. The temperature dropped even further, and the walls seemed to close in around them. The air was filled with the sound of scratching, like nails on a chalkboard, and the whispers turned into screams. Desperate, Jack pulled out the diary, hoping to find a way to appease the spirit. He read the final entry aloud, and as he did, the noise intensified. Suddenly, the diary was ripped from his hands and thrown across the room, pages fluttering wildly. Lisa, who had been reviewing the footage, noticed something terrifying. In the background of their recordings, a dark figure loomed, its eyes glowing with malevolence. "We need to confront it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Gathering their courage, they called out to the spirit, asking what it wanted. The room grew deathly silent, and then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once, it answered, "Leave or suffer." Determined to end the haunting, Jack shouted back, "We want to help you find peace." The air grew heavy, and the figure materialized before them. A twisted, tormented version of Martha Weaver. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and rage. "You cannot help. It is too late," she wailed, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. Realizing that the spirit was beyond their help, the shadow seekers made a final, desperate attempt to escape. They pushed against the door with all their might, and finally it gave way. They stumbled out into the night, the house behind them screaming in protest. As they reached their vehicles, the farmhouse fell eerily silent. They watched as the windows shattered one by one, and the once sturdy walls began to crumble. The house seemed to be collapsing in on itself, as if it could no longer contain the malevolent force within. Exhausted and shaken, the shadow seekers drove away, vowing never to return. The footage they captured became the most compelling evidence of the supernatural they had ever encountered, but it came at a cost. Each member of the team was haunted by nightmares and an unshakable feeling of being watched. The Weaver farm, now a pile of rubble, was finally left in peace. The townspeople, hearing of the investigators' experience, steered clear of the area entirely. The story of the farm became a legend, a warning to those who might be tempted to disturb what should remain undisturbed. To this day, locals claim that on quiet nights, you can still hear the faint whispers of the Weaver family, forever trapped between worlds, and the chilling scream of a house that harbored more than just memories. The collapse of the Weaver farm seemed to bring an end to the disturbances, but the legend of the farm only grew stronger. The Shadow Seekers footage, once shared online, became infamous, drawing the attention of thrill seekers, paranormal enthusiasts, and skeptics alike. Despite the warnings, some were eager to see the haunted site for themselves. Among these was David, a local historian with a keen interest in uncovering the truth behind the town's darker tales. He had seen the Shadow Seekers footage and believed there was more to the story of the Weaver farm. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, David began researching the town's archives, looking for any clues that might explain the malevolent presence that had terrorized the farm for decades. David's research led him to old town records and interviews with some of the oldest residents. He discovered that the Weaver family had a dark history long before the farm became haunted. Martha Weaver's grandfather, Edward Weaver, was rumored to have been involved in occult practices. Strange rituals and secret gatherings were whispered about but never confirmed. One evening, as David was poring over old documents in the town's library, he found a tattered notebook hidden among the archives. The notebook belonged to Edward Weaver and was filled with cryptic symbols, incantations, and detailed accounts of his experiments to communicate with the dead. One entry stood out. June 13, 1901. The ritual is complete. I have bound the spirit to our bloodline, ensuring protection and power. But something went wrong. The spirit is angry, vengeful. It whispers in the night, demanding release. I fear for my descendants. David realized that the haunting of the Weaver farm was not just the result of a restless spirit, but the consequence of Edward's dark rituals. The spirit, bound to the Weaver bloodline, had grown more malevolent with each generation, culminating in the tragic events experienced by Martha and the Harrisons. Armed with this new information, David sought out the remaining members of the Weaver family, hoping to find someone who could help him undo the ritual. He found Martha's great-niece, Olivia, living in a neighboring town. Olivia was initially skeptical, but as David shared the history and the findings from Edward's notebook, she began to believe that her family's curse could be broken. Together, David and Olivia decided to perform a counter-ritual to release the spirit and end the curse. They returned to the site of the collapsed farm, now overgrown with weeds and eerily silent. As night fell, they set up a small altar with candles, herbs, and the tattered notebook. Olivia, as the last of the Weaver bloodline, would perform the ritual with David's guidance. As they began the ritual, the air grew cold, and the oppressive feeling of being watched returned. The ground beneath them trembled, and the faint whispers of the spirit grew louder. Olivia recited the incantations from the notebook, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind extinguished the candles, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. The spirit of Edward Weaver appeared before them, his face twisted with rage and anguish. "You dare to defy me?" he bellowed. Olivia stood her ground, tears streaming down her face. "We release you, spirit bound by blood. Return to the void from whence you came. Your torment ends here." The spirit screamed in fury, but as Olivia continued the incantation, its form began to waver and dissolve. The ground shook violently, and a blinding light enveloped the area. When the light faded, the spirit was gone, and the oppressive presence lifted. David and Olivia collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved. The curse that had plagued the Weaver family for generations was finally broken. The site of the farm remained quiet, no longer haunted by the malevolent spirit. Word of their success spread through the town, and the Weaver farm was left in peace, becoming a symbol of the power of knowledge and bravery. The townspeople, once fearful of the cursed land, now respected it as a place where darkness had been confronted and overcome. David continued his work as a historian, forever changed by his experience. Olivia, free from her family's dark legacy, found peace and a new beginning. The story of the Weaver farm, once a tale of horror, became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring hope that even the darkest curses can be lifted with courage and determination. With the curse lifted, the Weaver farm's land remained untouched for years, gradually reclaimed by nature. The townspeople no longer spoke of it with fear, but rather with a sense of respect for the bravery shown by David and Olivia. However, some mysteries remained unsolved, leaving an air of intrigue around the farm's history. David, ever the dedicated historian, continued to dig into the town's past, now with a focus on understanding the broader implications of Edward Weaver's rituals. He suspected that there were other places with similar dark histories, potentially connected through a network of occult practices that stretched far beyond the small Pennsylvania town. One winter, David received a cryptic letter in the mail. It was unsigned and written in an old-fashioned script. The letter read, "Mr. David, you have unlocked one secret, but many more remain. The Weaver curse was but one part of a greater puzzle. Seek the truth in the northern woods. There you will find the answers you seek. But beware, for the shadows are deeper than you know." Intrigued and a bit apprehensive, David decided to follow the lead. He contacted Olivia, who, despite having moved on from the Weaver legacy, felt a sense of duty to assist in uncovering the full story. Together, they prepared for a journey to the northern woods mentioned in the letter. The northern woods were known for their dense trees and eerie silence, a stark contrast to the open fields around the old Weaver farm. David and Olivia arrived at a small, secluded cabin that seemed to be the starting point of their search. Inside the cabin, they found old maps, strange artifacts, and more notebooks filled with cryptic symbols and rituals similar to those of Edward Weaver. One notebook in particular stood out. It was labeled the Codex of Shadows and contained detailed descriptions of rituals, spirits, and the history of an ancient cult known as the Order of Eternal Night. The Order had practiced dark arts, aiming to control and manipulate spirits for power. Edward Weaver had been a member of this cult, and the curse on the Weaver family was a consequence of a failed attempt to harness a particularly malevolent spirit. David and Olivia realized that the spirit bound to the Weaver family was not the only one. The Order of Eternal Night had conducted similar rituals in other locations, each leaving behind a trail of curses and restless spirits. The letter had been a warning and a guide, pointing them to one of the cult's significant sites. Determined to uncover and perhaps put an end to the Order's lingering influence, they ventured deeper into the woods. They followed the maps and symbols, leading them to a hidden clearing where the remnants of a stone altar stood, covered in vines and moss. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the forest seemed unnaturally quiet. As night fell, they prepared to perform a ritual to cleanse the area, using what they had learned from the Codex of Shadows. They lit candles, arranged protective symbols, and began chanting the incantations meant to break the dark bonds. The air grew colder, and shadows danced around them, shapes forming and dissipating at the edge of the clearing. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a deep, guttural growl echoed through the woods. The malevolent spirit, bound to the altar for centuries, materialized before them. A towering figure of darkness, eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It lashed out with tendrils of shadow, knocking David to the ground and sending Olivia sprawling. David, struggling to his feet, shouted the incantation with all his might. Olivia joined in, their voices merging into a powerful force. The spirit roared in fury, but as the incantation reached its climax, the tendrils of shadow began to wane. The protective symbols glowed brightly, pushing back the darkness. With a final, piercing scream, the spirit dissolved into the night, the oppressive energy lifting from the clearing. Exhausted and shaken, David and Olivia knew they had succeeded in breaking another dark link of the Order of Eternal Night. Their journey did not end there. Armed with the knowledge from the Codex of Shadows, they continued to seek out and confront other remnants of the cult, determined to bring peace to the spirits bound by dark rituals and to prevent such malevolent forces from rising again. The town, now free from its most sinister secret, thrived, and David and Olivia's efforts became legendary. Their work served as a reminder that even in the face of deep shadows, courage and determination could illuminate the darkest of paths, bringing hope and peace to those affected by the past's lingering horrors. David and Olivia's journey to unravel the mysteries of the Order of Eternal Night took them across the country, uncovering forgotten sites and releasing trapped spirits. Each location held its own terrifying challenges, but with every victory, they grew more confident and adept at confronting the darkness. Years passed, and their work brought them to the final known stronghold of the Order, a remote, desolate mansion deep in the Appalachian Mountains. The mansion, long abandoned, was said to be the epicenter of the Order's darkest rituals and the source of their power. The air around the mansion was thick with malevolent energy, a palpable reminder of the evil that had once thrived there. Determined to put an end to the Order's influence once and for all, David and Olivia prepared for their most dangerous confrontation yet. They set up their equipment in the mansion's grand hall, which was adorned with decaying tapestries and crumbling statues. The walls seemed to close in on them as they began their final ritual, chanting incantations from the Codex of Shadows. The mansion responded with violent tremors, and shadows twisted into grotesque forms, attacking with a fury that surpassed anything they had faced before. David and Olivia stood firm, their voices unwavering as they continued the incantation. The air crackled with dark energy, and the room grew colder with each passing second. Suddenly, the floor beneath them split open, revealing a hidden chamber filled with ancient relics and the skeletal remains of the order's high priests. The malevolent spirit that had controlled the order rose from the depths, a towering figure of pure darkness. Its eyes burned with a malevolent light, and its voice echoed with centuries of rage and torment. "You dare to challenge me?" the spirit roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the mansion. David and Olivia, undeterred, continued their incantation, focusing all their energy on breaking the spirit's hold. The spirit lashed out, knocking them back and threatening to overwhelm their defenses. But they pressed on, drawing strength from each other and the knowledge that this was their final battle. As their voices reached a crescendo, the protective symbols they had drawn began to glow with an intense light. The spirit howled in pain, its form flickering and weakening. With a final, desperate push, David and Olivia completed the incantation, releasing a wave of purifying energy that engulfed the mansion. The spirit let out a final, ear-piercing scream before dissipating into nothingness. The oppressive darkness lifted, and the mansion fell silent. Exhausted but triumphant, David and Olivia knew they had succeeded in their mission. They emerged from the mansion, the first rays of dawn breaking over the mountains. The air was clear, and the malevolent energy that had plagued the area for centuries was gone. The mansion, now a hollow shell, stood as a testament to their courage and determination. David and Olivia returned to their town as heroes, their story inspiring others to confront their own fears and challenges. The tale of their journey spread far and wide, becoming a legend of resilience and the power of the human spirit. Years later, David and Olivia, now married and with a family of their own, continued to live in the town that had once been haunted by the Weaver farm. They never stopped exploring and uncovering the mysteries of the past, but their most important work had been done. The Order of Eternal Night was no more, and the spirits they had freed were finally at peace. The town thrived, its dark history transformed into a story of hope and redemption. The Weaver farm, now overgrown with wildflowers, stood as a quiet reminder of the bravery that had saved it. And David and Olivia, their bond forged in the fires of their shared struggles, lived out their days knowing they had made a difference. Their story, passed down through generations, reminded everyone that even in the darkest of times, the light of courage and love could shine through, dispelling the shadows and bringing peace to even the most tormented souls.